Welcome to the Mostro Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Bingham, and today I'm thrilled to have with us Vickie Nauman of CrossBorderWorks. Vickie is a titan in the realm of digital music. Her expertise spans from revolutionizing companies like Napster to integrating music technology globally. We're diving deep into the digital transformation of the music industry. Let's get started. Vickie Nauman, thank you so much for being on the Mostro Podcast today. I've been waiting to talk to you, waiting to have you as a guest on this podcast, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I always love doing these.
Great. So listen, you are well known in the music tech community. I see, you travel all over the world, you consult and are part of some really big, important projects. You continue to be. So let me just ask you, first question I have is about digital transformation. You've been instrumental in transitioning music companies like Napster to legal digital format. What are the biggest challenges that traditional music entities still face in fully embracing digital transformation?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think when people are looking at things like disruptive technologies today, like generative AI, there's so much history that has been lost in this digital transformation that people are not, a lot of people are, weren't around 25 years ago when music was originally disrupted by file sharing. It was the illegal Napster and then Kazaa and LimeWire, all of these different file sharing companies. And one of the things that I think is a consistent pattern is that disruptive technology comes around. The music industry identifies it as a threat. They oftentimes try to sue and put the toothpaste back in the tube. But this time that's not happening. I mean, there are lawsuits out there with Suno and Udio for sure. But I think that the music industry is really notorious for not embracing technology to its fullest, not using it to their advantage, but trying to control it. And I do see a different response to generative AI right now than there has been in the past. And, and a lot of the conversations that started a few years ago around the Grammys with AI, were, what are we going to do? It's here to stay. This is a tool. How can we use it to our advantage? How can we incorporate this into our business? It's a very, very different attitude now than it was 20 or so years ago, where everyone just wanted to make the technology go away. And I think that some of that has been the changing of the guard of the industry, younger people who are, less fearful of technology. But it has also been a result of, the music industry still has an incredible amount of concentration of power in three big companies, and it is going to protect its assets, and I'm always pushing for coming up with new sustainable business models to leverage tech, so that the technology does not become only a disruptive outside force, but it becomes something that can empower the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I think that's true. So I guess it's the slow pace of adoption is basically trying to not necessarily getting over perceiving it as a threat first, right? And then being able to integrate it and evolve with it. I understand.
And it takes a lot of time to do this, because if you think about, the major rights holders, most of them are, publicly traded companies, or they're under a lot of scrutiny for setting precedents. There's, like, the concentration of power in this industry with a handful of companies is so intense that they're always looking at, how can we extract money out of this? How can we extract value? How can this benefit our artists? And yet they are oftentimes, they're tangled up in legal battles, so they're not necessarily ready to start licensing and doing everything on a commercial basis until they figure out what the legal boundaries are. But there is there's an important pattern, and I think, what we're really getting at is also that in the early days of Napster was Kazaa, file sharing, the illegal business, and then all of these other businesses that have come along. There's almost always a burst of activity. There are a lot of companies that say copyright is not suitable. We have to, we can't move forward with technology if you have copyright laws. The industry almost always prevails and adapt eventually. And then out of the ashes, after litigation, after a lot of companies fail, out of the ashes come viable new models and new companies. And I feel like that's a pattern from the earliest days all the way through to Web3 and decentralized technologies. And it will also be the same with artificial intelligence and generative AI.
It's a process, basically.
Yeah.
How to
Yeah.
earn it's a process. Yeah.
It is. It is the process. And it's also something that is, you're coming at this also from an entrepreneurial perspective. And we do have many people who are entrepreneurs who get so frustrated with the music business because they're not fast enough, they move too slowly, they don't adopt technology, they don't see our point of view. And I feel like some of that kind of conflict is healthy because, like technologists oftentimes forget that this is somebody else's intellectual property. And so it does take time and it can be frustrating, but there are also an extraordinary number of independent artists, independent labels, those who are not necessarily part of the three big companies who are excited about innovating. And I always encourage companies that want to do things quicker with music. Don't expect Universal Music to to bend to your timeline. They will not do that. So that's your long game, and then have a short game with, some independent artists and some companies that are more nimble, and you can get things done in the short term while you work on your long game.
Exactly. I think, yeah, it's always the smaller companies, smaller artists that can innovate. They have less to lose, and they're more agile. And then the bigger ones will follow. So yeah. We'll see how all of this sort of progresses, and it's exciting. Let me ask you about user experience innovations. At Sonos, you worked on enhancing the audio ecosystem. How do you balance innovation with user expectations, especially in an industry where audio quality and ease of use are critical?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, and I love that you brought this up about Sonos because, at the time when I was at Sonos, it was in the early days, 2007 to 2009, and I know I sound like an old lady when I start throwing these numbers out, but in the Sonos days, the alternative to Sonos was really people listening to music on their laptop or on a traditional system with CDs, and there's a lot of these man caves, mostly man caves all over the world that people are, still in full analog, which is fine too. But, Sonos was so laser focused on that end user and an elegant way to simply bring together digital music throughout your home so that you can have multiple speakers and there's absolutely no difference room to room. I mean, what you have to do from an engineering and digital signal processing to get the quality and that experience down is extremely difficult. And it has become now a standard that everyone expects. But I think that I think in order for anything to mainstream, especially with music consumers, it has to be really, really simple. It has to be elegant. And I think there's no better example of this than what went on in Web3 and the experimentation in the early days of the, clunky and really, really, you know, difficult user experiences of buying crypto and putting it in a wallet, get your MetaMask account, put the crypto in, attach your wallet to an NFT platform, buy an NFT, close the wallet, then where's the NFT? Where's my code? And I think that all of these things, new technologies, whether it's audio quality, buying collectibles, listening to music, all of these things, the bar is high with music consumers. And so, in order for things to mainstream with music, it has to be elegant, it has to be easy, and it has to be something that is an apparent, connection between a fan and an artist. And that's kind of that golden connection that has to be present in almost everything around music. And so I think we do have a common North Star with everything in music and technology, but I think a lot of young companies oftentimes underestimate what it takes to really do that elegant, simple, beautiful user experience.
Can you elaborate on that common North Star, what that common North Star is?
Well, even going back to the earliest days when music was free, it was all being file shared. Um, there's always been this North Star that if you build a better experience, people will pay for it. And I have never not believed that. And I remember in the early days of disruption, I was sitting in a major label office in New York, and they were saying, we feel like there's not going to be any future value in recorded music anymore. That it is just eroding and that chapter is closed. And I walked out of that meeting and I was just kind of speechless because I felt like, how could you work in a recorded music company and think that there's never going to be any reason why a user would pay for it? I have always felt that music consumers will gladly pay for music. Um, but it has to be fair. It has to be, easy. Music has to be portable. It has to sound really good, which means, you have to have the right equipment and headphones maybe, and all speakers, all of these things. And so I think this North Star that we have is that, you know, music represents something to fans about the artist, about the sound, about what it does to people's lives and how it improves people's lives. But we also have to use technologies in ways that make it easy for users to open their wallet and pay for music and also get access quickly to the things that matter to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about blockchain also here. Uh, Now you're obviously a huge advocate for blockchain in the music industry, and we've talked about some, let's say, obstacles to the ease of use. But can you discuss a specific instance where blockchain technology might not meet the expectations of enthusiasts?
Yes, I think that blockchain, from when I first started understanding blockchain, which was probably, I don't know, probably 12 years ago, I bought crypto, I bought Bitcoin in 2014. I was really an enthusiast because I felt like we have a problem with metadata in music is that, you have the sound recording, you have the underlying composition. These are rights that should be linked together permanently because whomever performed on a song and whoever wrote the song, those things are inherent in every single recording. That I saw blockchain as a really good potential for solving some of these metadata problems. And but as time went by, I started to see resistance to this and from the major stakeholders. And there's also some technical issues with using blockchain as, a database, for simplicity purposes. But so I'll talk about both of these things. Is that if you think about at a high level, yes, storing data, metadata, and ownership information on the blockchain, there's permanence of data. There is a reference point that you can always go back. If somebody sold their shares, you can see that, and you could see that the publishing went from one entity to another, but the sound recording remained the same, and that you would be able to have traceability, immutability of data. And that for me was really the nugget that I saw as having so much potential for solving some of these metadata problems. But what we started finding is that the traditional music industry was reluctant, is reluctant to put all their data out there. They feel like some of this data, especially getting down to granularity of how, who wrote on a song, how much of a share does Rihanna actually have? Did she actually write the song? Why are there 20 writers on this song? You know, of having all of that granularity out there was something that there was a lot of resistance around. There's also public company concerns about using blockchain technology that they felt was, are we just going to like permanently put all of our data on somebody else's chain and then there's no possibility of removing it? And so there are a lot of like security and privacy concerns that came from the industry. I think there were also some concerns about the just the identifiers themselves, things changing over time and not wanting to have them affixed. And so it became, there was a little bit of a mourning period for me, quite frankly, where I felt like, oh, this has so much potential, but I don't see it coming together. Um, and so I have had to adjust my own expectations around this. And now the position that I take with blockchain is that, in addition to these industry concerns, there are concerns around environmental impact and how much energy does a decentralized chain take, and then also, what is the cost of storing literally billions of shares of music songs on a chain, and who's paying for that, and how is that going to, empower and enable everyone in the industry. um, all the puzzle pieces started not quite coming together. And so I think that where I have adjusted my own ideas and expectations is around blockchain use in particular, is that I don't necessarily see this as something that the entire industry is going to adopt. It's difficult to marry old systems and new systems. It's difficult to herd cats. Um, this is very much a business of herding cats. But where I do think that there is an enormous amount of potential is with young artists who are really forward thinking, who oftentimes are creating music and they are writing their own music, they're performing their own music, maybe they're DJs, maybe they have a handful of collaborators, and that they are wanting to empower themselves to go into the world of decentralized tech, collectibles, in fan engagement. I still feel like there is an incredible amount of value in many of the things that came out of the Web3 activities around community and scarcity and collecting that really, really do work for music. But I don't necessarily see that the major stakeholders in the industry will be the ones embracing it. I think it will be a little bit more on the fringes and a little bit more with artists who might just say, you know, I want to forge a different path with my art, and I want to do it in a way that is, you know, fully in a world where I can control everything and I can monetize everything, and I don't have a label or a publisher telling me what I can or can't do. And I think this is like a pulling apart of two different mentalities in the industry of kind of a traditional path and a very non-traditional path.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can see that. You can sort of, I definitely can see that happening in Web3. And then going to visit, well, because I'm very deep in Web3 with Mostro, and then going to the A2IM conference, which I think you were at as well. And I missed seeing you there, the A2IM conference in New York this past June. Very little on innovation besides possibly your presentation. I was surprised, and I said, "We all got Stockholm syndrome. There's another way. We all got to break out of this." So, oh,
It's
yeah,
it's really true, and I feel like now I feel like, you're someone who has also maintained enthusiasm, and there are still a lot of companies, Pixelinks, there's lots of things that are still happening that people's eye has been taken off of all of this onto mostly generative AI. But I think that as I see like two things happening in parallel of better user experiences, more elegant ease of use in everything around Web3, decentralized tech, and the rise of the independent creator and things like the changes in Spotify's model and, of not paying, under 1,000 streams, these kinds of things are also just pushing those independent creators a little bit further along the entrepreneurial path of saying, well, you can go put your music in Spotify, but if you have 30 songs and they all have less than 1,000 streams, you're not going to really make money. So then maybe that's your promotional outlet, but are you going to engage fans in some other way that will enable you to efficiently monetize and build a career, in a totally different ecosystem? And that is kind of this convergence that I see happening around this tech.
yeah, I agree with you. And I want to get into streaming for a second, but I actually want to talk about what the initial. I just want to talk about Spotify, the initial appeal to Spotify. Someone who is pre-internet and was an independent musician when the internet came in and Napster came in, and I went where we all went. What are we? You can listen to music on your computer. Like, what are we? What? And looking at my box of CDs and going, what am I going to do with these? Are people going to buy them anymore? And then MySpace came in, and MySpace was cool because it was free and okay. And then we were waiting to see what the major labels were going to do. And they came out with Spotify. And the thing with Spotify, and this I'll be explaining this in the white paper I'm writing on Mostro, and this coming up in the next month or so. But I just want to say this in this context of even this conversation. The thing was that prior to the internet, there was a huge cleavage between the in music business. Like there was independent music and there was major label, and the paths did not cross. Like you had your indie journalism, college music, college radio stations. We didn't play the same clubs. We didn't. It was all different. Not the same media, not the same press. And so the internet comes along, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, what's going to happen now with music? And when so the major labels when they find when all of us indie artists were going like, what are they going to do with this new thing? It was Spotify, and the thing was, it was the first time that us as indie artists we were able to market ourselves on the same platform or put our music on the same platform as the Rolling Stones, and as all the other major, and that's the first time we were all in the same sort of room. That was that was the appeal. And then it was, well, what do we get paid? Oh, well, do we have a choice? No, well, I guess we're just going to use this. And here we are all these years later and a generation later, where a lot of artists think this is just what we've got and this is just the way that it works. And it is a drive to the bottom. That's my opinion, because it's not the motivation for the artist is marketing, but don't understand it as being a financial moneymaker for you. That is never what it was. So from the get-go. So that's just my take as someone who's, Gen X and has lived through all of these changes.
Absolutely. And I also remember in the 90s, and in the early 2000s, like I was very deep in the indie community. I worked in, indie radio in Seattle. I was part of the Seattle music scene. And there was just we had a disdain for artists that had huge commercial success, like that was really the era of sellouts. And
Fellow, yeah.
it was funny. I saw Beck perform recently, and he was kind of reflecting on this, and he said, "Yeah, wasn't it weird in the '90s that we hated bands just because they sold too many records?" I thought that was really funny, but it was part of the culture at the time. Is that there was this indie culture and then this mainstream music commercial culture, and there was like a Venn diagram with very very little overlap. And I think at the beginning of streaming and kind of access models, there was this idea of the long tail, and that the long tail would rise, and that that there would be more of a marketplace for independent artists to be commingled with the biggest artists, and that, labels and publishers, everyone would start to be disintermediated. And that has not proven to be true. It has, there's more concentration of power now than there was in 1998 before all of this disruption happened. But the other thing that has happened is it is still an enormously hit-driven business. But I think that it's really important for everyone to understand that the underlying business models, what we have now with social media, with on-demand streaming, with these broad-based platforms, is that they are all volume-based. So they are going to pay people, the biggest artists, the best money because they get hundreds of millions of streams. And that if you are in the middle, if you're a baby band and you're just putting things out to express things, just to kind of let your friends listen or just to express yourself creatively, you don't really care because you're not really, you're an accountant during the day, you're doing this on the weekend, it's just fun. But there's a middle layer of musicians who are trying to make a go of it professionally. They're trying to make a living. Maybe they're on an independent label and they don't have volume. They don't have volume of use. Either the fans don't listen to music over and over and over again. You're not on huge playlists. Um, and that's where I think there is a breakdown in these models, is that the the ability of users to just stream someone's song and earn them a fraction of a penny is not meaningful as a fan, and it's not meaningful compensation to the artist. And I also don't think it's a reflection of how people feel about their music. And so all of these things, the kind of the changes of Spotify's model, the emergence of new technologies, the rise of the creator class, I feel like all of these things are kind of pressure points to come up with new models that are going to work for tribes and that are going to work for niche artists and artists that have long-standing fans. But there isn't really a good mechanism for fans to express their fandom and spend money online except for streaming, and it's not working for everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, that's it. So this is basically the only way to resolve these issues around streaming is probably with new models, to come up with new models. I'd like to ask you about the actually the future of music consumption then. Because, okay, we're talking about streaming, we talked about blockchain, we talked about AI. Where do you see the future of music consumption heading in the next 5 years, and what might be the potential pitfalls of the progression?
Well, I feel like I think it's a great, and it's kind of a great way to wrap this conversation because the if we think about on-demand streaming, the problem that on-demand streaming solved was giving everybody cloud-based access to everything that was ever created in one convenient place so that we knew, the value proposition of all of these services, Apple Music, Spotify, all of the companies that came before Spotify, Mog, RDO, Rhapsody, Deezer, all of these other companies, they have the same basic value proposition to the user, which is, pay one low price, get access to everything ever created, be able to listen to any song on demand. And that problem of the chaos of how do you find all the music and hundreds of millions of songs that have been created in one place has been solved. And it is, it's done. It will not go anywhere. I fully believe that Spotify and Apple and Deezer and all these companies are going to continue to evolve their models and their offerings, but they're like a utility. That music lovers are never going to give up their access to music. So then what is next? And a lot of what I am spending my time on is with adjacent industries of gaming, AR, VR, XR. I'm still an enthusiast around Web3, and these are what I would consider where the next generation of consumers are going to be spending their free time. And music has to be there, but it's not necessarily the same experience of having a great Spotify playlist in the background while you cook. It's more immersive, it's more music forward. And I think especially in games and virtual worlds, this is where the next generation is hanging out with friends. I mean, this is the generation that we used to go and get on our bikes after school and ride around the neighborhood. And this young generation is doing the equivalent, but they're doing it in Roblox. And we need to bring music into all of these worlds and work on fan engagement in games and in virtual worlds and immersive experiences. And that is where I believe the next big wave of innovation is going to be happening. And I think there's an inordinate potential, but it is also valuable from a innovation on business models that we can come up with all sorts of new ways of monetizing fans, of monetizing music, and really building engagement around artists and the music that they've created.
So, as we've explored today, thanks to Vickie's fantastic professional insights, the future of music isn't just about listening. It's about interactive, immersive experiences that meet fans where they increasingly spend their time, in games, in virtual worlds, and maybe even on the blockchain. Let's continue to weave music into these digital communities. Thanks again to Vickie Nauman for coming on to the show. Join us next time on the Mostro Podcast. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Sign up for our newsletter at mostro.xyz. Until next time, tune in and turn up for innovation.